Hello Di, welcome to Bush Telly here at Ellerslie.
Thank you, lovely to be here.
Yeah, it's
great.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Yes, fantastic, it is. It's a great show, and it's a great exhibit.
Yeah, they're wonderful. So we've been talking to a few people here, and we wanted to talk to you particularly about the restoration guidelines you put together. But before we do that, I'd be keen to hear a bit about your background and how you got to writing these restoration guidelines and how you grew your passion for conservation.
Well, I come from a rural background. I had a botany degree and landscape architecture training, and 30 years ago I set up a practice in South Canterbury, actually reacting against Muldoon's encouragement for clearance of rural New Zealand. I was outraged at just increased stock numbers, disregarding what other values there might be, and that's why I set up practice. And that's 1979. And I got asked to run workshops for rural people, and design workshops and planning workshops, and I found that I was always trying to help people understand what the local native plants were, and I found that it was quite hard to get the information. So I assembled my own lists, and for the different types of country in South Canterbury for a start, and then I thought, well, it's useful for these to be public. And so in 1981 I put out the first guide for South Canterbury, for a rural design guide. It was the first one in New Zealand.
So these are planting for shelter belts and
yes, design for everything. How to make your house fit in the landscape, and how to design your woodlot and everything. But it included in the back guides to what were the local native plants for different hills and downs and plains. So and it said, it showed what to use for hedges or shelter or whatever. So it was 1981. It was the first one. And it's just because New Zealand is special in the world. We've got a flora that's so different than anywhere else. Been separate for 80 million years or whatever, and so we have this distinct flora. But within New Zealand, there's such diversity, so that plants in South Canterbury are very different than plants in the Waikato. I'd worked in the Waikato previously, and I know, very much there are a lot of different plants. And so I thought, well, let's look at the local. It's not just about New Zealand natives. It's about what is locally native, what gives a sense of place locally, but also what's robust. What's robust and what helps the local environment. So it's gone from there. And so I've always tried to understand local flora and enable people to access that, to understand that, and to be able to work with it. So now work isn't about restoration necessarily, but also design within the local palette. So from sort of initially being an appendix from a general rural design guideline, it's become into actual booklets themselves that you put out for restoration guidelines for around the country, many parts of the country. Yes, quite a few parts. In Christchurch from 1995 we were asked by community groups, community boards, and to look at the nature of Christchurch, and I thought, wow, out in the country, it's paddocks and farms and, different types of land. In town, you kind of divide by suburbs and streets. So we thought we should put things on a street map, because that's your guide to the city. And so we used street maps as a base, and we overlaid on there the different ecosystems that would occur here naturally, interpreted through source data and so on, but that you can identify through your local street, so that each street has a different flora. And then we worked from there in different parts, Waitakere City in Auckland, soon after we'd done Christchurch, and that was exciting. We looked, because that's about the richest part of New Zealand in biodiversity, West Auckland. 110 ferns, huge flora, very exciting. And so we put together a guide for Waitakere City as a planting guide, and we developed quite a full document which hasn't all been published yet. They've republished parts of it, but a lot of it they guide to how you could have a scented garden and all these different dimensions that are in the flora that you could use.
Oh, great. Tell us a bit about that process of building up the suite of plants that can be used. So, what's that process you talked about describing the local ecosystem?
Yes.
What actual process do you go through to come up with the suite of plants?
Well, always work with a team. Although I've got a science background, natural sciences, I always work with local botanists and geomorphologists that understand that well, and that can get to interpret the flora, whether it's still existing and that can be cued from remnants into that same soil and same habitat, and to replicate that across an area, or whether you have to actually interpret from historic data. So there's a lot of research involved, and depends on the local knowledge of expertise of people as well. So always teaming up with experts, and roping them, tying them down to get it in an accessible way, to get it so that we can interpret these in a friendly way, not difficult scientific data, but into a friendly way. So I'm a bit dragging in those things, trying to get things interpreted.
Yeah, but really accessible to the community.
It's got to be easy to understand. And it's not just for lay people, it's for our colleagues. It's for people in the landscape professions and all these professions. They need as much as the lay person.
To make sure that the right plants are going in the right place, and it's reflecting the local landscape.
So a local nursery can say, these are the local native plants. I mean, how do they find out otherwise? It's very hard for people.
So you find you're actually educating nursery people as well.
And I get pleas from landscape contractors, they're desperately dependent on these guys. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And we've done in the Bay of Plenty and Marlborough and various parts of New Zealand. It's been great. It's been great. Yes. And then I've helped advise for some other local people to help do theirs, like at Nelson.
Oh, great. Okay, so they've done their own.
But they've done their own,
Oh, fantastic.
Based on our sort of approach.
And in these guides, you also, I've had a look at them, you include things about how to attract certain birds and the time of years for pollination, or for seed for birds, or for insects for birds. That's all part of what you do.
And different ones, we've dealt with differently in different guides, but some, what's a particular lizard-friendly plants, the blueberries of the Dianella, or the different plants, what are they good for attracting different birds for nectar and fruit, good for invertebrates, and yes, we've tried to make sure we do that. But also, it's not just about thinking. We've tried to avoid just saying this is a plant that will grow to 3 metres and use it like this. We've tried to avoid that, because plants will be used in huge different number of ways, whether it's some sort of rural restoration or an urban restoration, or a modern design, courtyard garden style, or there's thousands of ways, and plants can be managed differently for different circumstances. So we've been quite to not be too prescriptive in terms of this is their intended use. Like in the Christchurch guides, we steered right away from that. We just said these can grow to be tall shrubs or small trees, and we haven't interpreted how you use them. But also, we tried to show that the sorts of conditions, of course, that they are happy in, the amount of shade, sunshade, the amount of moisture, the sorts of substrates they occur naturally on, whether from sand country or grauwacke or clay, and but also look through to phasing, so that some plants are good pioneer plants, some you bring in later once you've got a canopy. So we've tried to demonstrate that, because it's wrong to think that you can just plant something and it's done forever. I mean, it's never done forever. You've got to phase. You've got to have your first plants and then others coming up underneath. And, you've got to phase things. And it's trying to teach people about phasing. I mean, everybody falls in that trap. I mean, so many people do, even councils. There's this mass pioneer planting and no underplanting. And we need to get much more sophisticated at that. So what we've tried to do is show that you need to think about the microclimates you create and how you might enrich with those.
Fantastic.
Yes. No, it's good because it's just a start. I mean, all of these things can be improved on and taken further over time and teased out to a finer scale for everywhere. Yes. But getting down to, like in Christchurch, a street level, we've done that elsewhere too, down to really local scale. We find that neat because you see people say, well, I'm from this sort of ecosystem.
This is my place, not
my friends from this another sort of ecosystem. That's neat.
And have you noticed in the places where you've put out the guide an increase in the that information being used and people actually getting out there? And,
Yes, there is. And just a greater understanding, and because there's a lack of awareness in many places of the diversity that exists. I was amazed in Waitakere, looking around in Waitakere City, which has such a rich flora. Gardens, we're planting non-local stuff and exotic plants in complete ignorance of what belonged around them. And I think there's been a big change. The guide for there, it's in its third or fourth reprint, so it's been wonderful.
And are the guides generally distributed by councils or they're made publicly available? Yes,
they have been. Waitakere is distributed by Waitakere City Council. The Rotorua one through the city. The Marlborough one, they've got a sort of subgroup there, but I think you get it through the city, through Marlborough District Council on their website, I think. Christchurch was through the city offices. It's now in the Botanic Gardens, the information centre. And hopefully I'll put more of them on our own website because there's a bit of a collection sort of evolved over the years, and so on our Luke Associates website, and then that if people could access them from there, because there's sort of a bit of a collection.
So they're all downloadable sort of thing from the website now, are they?
Well, we're just getting them into a form to put on.
Great.
I thought 30th birthday it should be time to do that.
Fantastic.
No, it's been good, though. It's been good. But still, a lot of New Zealand doesn't have that information, and I'm hoping that people will get into gear.
That's right. That sounds like somewhere like Nelson that's actually sort of using your advice to do it themselves as well. That's
good. And Wellington's done a guide. It's good. Yes. So, people often don't understand, especially once there's been subdivision development or even farm development, they have no idea what might have existed before, what might have belonged there naturally. And so it is important to find a way to give them a window to the past. Because in a lot of areas there's very little left. There's very little left to show you. And yet it's only a couple of hundred years ago when there was a lot. I mean, we've developed really rapidly in that regard, or changed rapidly, I should say. And so that it's hard for people to find out. If there's especially if there's no remnants, no little reserves, and often with reserves there's no interpretation. So even if there is a park or a small pocket of what's left, there's no one there to tell them about that.
That's right. Well, great, Di. It's fantastic hearing about all these guidelines around the country, and thanks for sharing some time here at Bush Tally.
Oh, pleasure. Absolute pleasure.